My name is Lillian Sandberg, and welcome to the Off Campus Programs podcast, Beyond Borders. Today, I have an amazing guest with me.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am a senior, and last year in the fall, I studied abroad in Vienna, Austria, with IES Vienna, specifically the European Society and Culture program from IES. I am an English literature major, so where I studied abroad actually had really nothing to do with my major, so it was okay. In terms of my graduation requirements, it was fine. It was just a term of electives.
Very cool. My first thing that I'm drawn to by your intro is like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear someone else went to a country where they didn't speak the language.
Oh gosh, no.
So far, everyone I've interviewed has been like either going to an English speaking country
Right.
or they're like a German studies like
Yeah.
minor or something and go to a German speaking country. And I'm glad to see I'm not like insane for deciding that.
Well, the program didn't have a language requirement, so I figured it would be fine.
Yeah,
And it was.
exactly. That's what's really important,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
They know what they're doing when they make those decisions, I think.
I agree. So, first question is there a specific reason that you chose your program over a different option?
Okay, a couple reasons, I would say. I first of all kind of wanted to get out of the Lawrence bubble. So, as an English literature major, one of the most obvious places to go is the London Center. I personally did not choose the London Center because I wanted to break out of the LU bubble. Like, the
Okay.
London Center has a lot of benefits, especially, like I said, for English majors. But I wanted to meet people from other schools. I
Okay.
wanted to do something different, and I really liked how large the Vienna program was. It is one of IES's largest programs. I think they have over 100 people there
Wow.
every semester.
Holy cow.
Which is it's huge. It's huge compared
Yeah.
to some of the other places, but that also means that they have a lot of classes. So I really liked the variety of classes they had. Whereas some of the other IES smaller programs or just smaller programs in general, less students means less options sometimes. Right. So I really liked that. I liked Vienna's location as well.
Okay.
We were
Cool.
doing a lot of traveling around Central Europe kind of vibes. Yeah, and I think those were the main decisions going into it. Like afterwards, of course, I would be like, oh my gosh, Vienna's an amazing city, but I was not considering that admittedly at all when I applied. I wasn't like, wow, Vienna, most livable city in the world. Like I just showed up the first week and they were like, Vienna's the most livable city in the world. Did you know that? And I was like, cool.
Yes, perks too. Where I feel like you always kind of learn things about your city that you're I didn't know this necessarily coming in, but now knowing this, I would totally come back and like advertise it that way.
Oh yeah.
So did you have any other LU students with you on this program?
I did. Okay. It was not completely devoid of Lawrence students. There were a bunch of people who go and still go every year for the music program in Vienna, because we have the music program and the European Society and Culture as options for us as Lawrence students in Vienna. So there were mostly people from the music program. There was at least one, maybe two other people who were on the European Society and Culture program with me, but mostly con students, which I know a couple con students in general. I'm sort of on the
con
outskirts.
Adjacent?
Yeah, con adjacent, I would say. I do choir. So I knew most of them, either like of them or actually knew them personally. So it was not like jumping completely into a foreign area, I would suppose. But it was a nice refresher, I think. Instead of being all Lawrence students, I was like, oh, a familiar face. And then a bunch of new people to meet.
Yeah. Very cool. So can you tell me kind of, I guess first, what were some things that you really liked about your program?
I liked the location.
Yeah.
I loved Vienna. I loved the subway. Everyone will say that I do not shut up about the trains and the U-Bahn, which is the subway in Vienna. So I loved that.
Okay.
I liked that the classes often took us on field trips. Just within the city. I took a history of Vienna class that took us, actually it was called Vienna Past and Present. I took a history of Vienna class.
Okay.
And it took us all around Vienna. Every week. So we had Mondays were lectures and Wednesdays we went on a field trip for our class time. So we went to an old Roman section where they found like Roman ruins underneath the city. We went to a couple of museums. We went on a walking tour of like outside in November, by the way. It was freezing. very cold. But we went to all sorts of really neat places that I could have gone as a student myself, just personal interest, but it was really meaningful to get that like perspective from a professor, because the professor for that class in particular had been a professor for many years at the University of Vienna, now retired, teaches at IES, sort of like just like retired people will do, take up a little hobby in their spare time. And for him it's talking about history, but it was so cool to get the perspective of like someone who's this is his area of expertise, instead of just going to the site and reading a pamphlet.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. We did our city tours in January in Freiburg.
Oh, that's cold.
And so it was also extremely cold. And I kind of wish I went in the fall, just for the reason because like those city tours were really cool, but the entire time I was just like, I'm cold. I want to go back to my apartment. Yeah. And I felt like I didn't actually like get as much out of it as I could have if the weather wasn't so bad.
Yeah, we definitely did a tour of, I want to say it was one of our very last ones, so late November, early December kind of area. And we were looking at the architecture of this one famous architect who I don't remember at all, but he came up with the idea of like the cohesive, everything must feed into the same like design of the building. Like you can't just throw a window in there and not care what shape it is, you have to care, stuff like that.
Interesting.
So it was a lot of standing outside and staring at buildings, obviously. And it was freezing, it was absolutely freezing. We were all just like, you know, warming our hands the whole time. And then I was trying to take notes on my phone, and you know when you get so cold you can't like, type anymore, you're just like, it's not working. Yeah, that was the vibe. That was the whole thing. It was so interesting, but we were freezing.
Right. Yeah. So besides your Vienna history course, what other courses did you take while you were abroad?
Well, I had to take German because that was just required of all students in the Vienna program, no matter your level of German. So even if you go with like German 202 under your belt, you still have to take German class. I took a women Austrian writers course. I believe this was the one specifically after 1945. So there's a lot of discussion about Austria's involvement in World War II and fascism, and delving deep into Austrian history here, but just in general how they were very complacent in the Holocaust especially. So there were a lot of works discussing that, and it was really fascinating class. Did not count towards my major because it was not originally written in English.
Gotcha.
But that's okay. It was still a great time.
Yeah.
And I took a film music course, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, it was a lot of, you know, history, but mostly history, I would say. Discussing it.
So, sorry, I have a question about this class.
No, for sure.
That sounds really interesting. So, like, what was it specifically about Austrian films?
It was just about the history of film music, period. Which obviously, you know, is more recent. So it's you're able to tackle it. You know, we didn't start having movies with sound until the 20s or 30s.
Right.
So you could tackle the whole like genre through the class. But there were a lot of Austrian composers in the film industry, or a lot of at least Germanic as well. But I recall that our professor was always saying like, this person has Austrian influence, and I was like, so many, because Vienna is obviously a city of music. A lot of people are trained around Vienna, so I couldn't name them off the top of my head, don't ask me now, but there were a lot of Austrian influences. But of course it was a lot of Hollywood, just because film was really kicking off in Hollywood. So people would come over the ocean to work there.
Yeah, cool.
So more generalized, that one, but still very not Vienna centric, but had a lot to do with the music.
Vienna adjacent.
Yeah,
that's my new favorite word.
Yeah.
Con adjacent, Vienna adjacent.
Yeah.
It's all adjacent.
Yeah.
Last course?
Last course. I did an internship for my last course, actually. It was a very last minute decision, admittedly. They had spots left in the education seminar internships. And I couldn't get into my last preferred course. And I was sort of looking at alternatives, and I thought that sounded interesting, because the professor leading the seminar talked a lot about how since IES Vienna does not require you to speak German to attend all the classes that you take, unless you're, at an upper level of German, you're in English, you're taking classes with mostly other US students.
Mm-hmm.
So you are still in a bit of an American bubble.
Right.
And the internship was an interesting way to break out of that for me, because you went into Austrian schools and I was essentially like an English teaching assistant.
Oh,
yeah,
that's really interesting.
So it really depended on what the teachers wanted me to do day to day. A lot of just being a reference sometimes for what is this word, or how do we grammatically do this, or like, why is English so weird?
Right.
There was one class where I pretty much just helped them all prep for these oral exams they had coming up. It was some sort of big, like, countrywide test, I want to say. It was just one of those language tests where they're like, can you speak English? And they had to, in this test, talk for an extended period of time or a certain limit of time about something in English, and obviously they had to do it well if they were going to get a good grade.
Right.
So I pretty much just sat and talked with them for a while about whatever random thing their textbook wanted them to talk about.
Okay.
For some reason, there was a lot of statistics involved. They had to like point at the table and say, oh, like 30% of these athletes really, they play soccer or something. Which was
interesting.
Yeah, I don't really know why the topics were what they were, but
okay,
it was a really varied experience. And that one was, you didn't just, it wasn't one size fits all. People were in different levels. Most people were in what we would call high school settings, but some people, I think 2 people were in elementary school settings.
I wonder if that was based on their like German experience, maybe.
I don't think it was.
No,
I think at least one of the people I know who went to an elementary school was also taking novice abroad German. So
that sounds difficult.
I don't know if you had this experience in Germany, but the German-speaking children seem to do just fine learning English.
Yes.
It's probably the similarities of the language, but they're also very intent on teaching it to them.
Yeah, it's taught so early that they pretty quickly get a handle on it.
I will say the elementary kids, though, they had to take there was a lot of communication barriers there, obviously. It was more like, how can we communicate outside of language to get the point of language across? Like, we're focusing on colors today. How can we, somehow make an activity out of this? It was a lot easier for me because even my youngest kids, who were, I believe, what we would call 6th graders, they were still like basically fluent. I was amazed at their abilities. Yeah. And some of them did struggle. I think I had a skewed perception because the ones who talked the most were obviously the most confident. Right. And there were certainly some kids who, when I would go around when they were doing individual work and see where they were at and sort of help out, there were kids who were really shy, and I could tell they didn't know what was happening as well. But most of the class was really, really good at English.
Wow.
It was impressive.
That's
and they
really
were
cool.
like 11. They were also so cute. Those kids, I miss them. They were adorable. I mean, the other ones were lovely too, but the 6th graders, the cutest.
Yeah. So how did you get placed into classrooms? Were you constantly moving around, or did you have like set courses that you were regularly attending that you kind of got to know that class and those kids?
It was set courses. So you told the internship coordinator, the seminar professor, what your free blocks of time were. So my freest block of time was Monday mornings, which was awesome for me because it meant I got up at like 6:30 in the morning to be at the internship at like, I want to say 7:30, 7:45 or so, because it was way on the other side of Vienna. So I had a solid like 45-minute commute. It was yeah. You really got to see the whole of the U-Bahn line. That was exciting for me. You really just, I don't think I ever made it to the other end, but I consistently went to the north end of it, I believe it was.
Very cool.
Yeah, but anyway, 45-minute commute. For me, because that was the biggest block of time I had available, and they wanted I believe IES had a certain amount of time they wanted you in the internship every week,
right?
So they were looking to fill that amount of time, and they preferred not to like split you up and have you come in multiple 2 days a week. Yeah, it was a lot easier to just have you do it all in one go. So I went in and I had like the first 4 class blocks. I was in classrooms, and not every week was like that. Some weeks they were saying, oh, we have a test today, so we can't have you in, because what are you going to do? Just watch them take a test?
Right.
But I had the same 4 teachers and the same 4 classes every week that I went in.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had something a little bit similar in Freiburg, but
Okay.
it wasn't an internship. It was like a volunteer situation where you could
Oh.
work with it was called the Carl Schurz House, and it was
Okay.
like they work with the US foreign service sort of people
Oh.
on German American relations. And so you could go and like talk for an hour and 15 minutes to
Mm-hmm.
a German class and have them, they
Huh.
would like tell you what topics they were interested in. You would prepare like a slideshow and then just go and talk to the class, answer questions,
Huh.
like throw around some footballs, like all this kind of like quintessential American stuff. And so it
That's
wasn't
interesting.
super
Yeah.
regular, but if you wanted it to be like, I went to, I think, 5 or 6
Mm.
classes during my time. So
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't get asked a lot of questions about America. I feel like if I was there this fall, I would be getting so many questions
true.
about the election. I feel like all the teachers would have asked me to do a whole segment on the election.
Yeah.
Uh,
I felt like I already got a ton of questions about that being there in the
hmm.
spring because
Oh,
we were in
yeah.
election year.
Right.
But I bet the students who are there right now are just getting like bombarded.
Oh, I'm sure, especially by my oldest class, where I want to say they were 16 or 17 years old,
Yeah.
much more aware of it than the sixth graders would. I don't think the sixth graders would have cared, but the older kids,
Yeah.
they would have been asking me some hard questions like, why do you have the electoral college?
Which I had a class that actually asked me like
I'm
that
not
exact
surprised. It's a
question.
very confusing concept
Yeah.
for Americans themselves. I'm not surprised that the foreign citizens are
Yeah.
asking that.
Which luckily in the EU program, most of us were in government.
Oh yeah,
So
there you go.
we all could like generally explain what the points were.
Yep.
But I can't imagine someone who's just like there on vibes. Like I had the wildest, like some of the most out of pocket things asked to me, which I mean it's not their fault. They're asking honest questions,
Yeah.
but it was
Well, they really want to know, and
yeah.
sometimes they don't realize how crazy the question is,
Yeah.
or
So
just maybe different standards always in different countries of like what's considered rude.
right.
And
But
honestly, sometimes they're just really curious kids.
and that's what it comes down to is like I don't know, we were basically run through like yeah, they might ask questions that you wouldn't ever expect someone in the States to ask you, but they're
Yeah.
not doing it to be mean. They're
No.
doing it because they're curious. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
sometimes it's just literally that they don't have as advanced a level of English. They
Which
don't mean it to sound rude. It just comes out that way because they don't have maybe all the verbs that they need to use,
right.
like the polite verbs or whatever.
Yeah.
The way they talked about learning English was crazy to me. They would just, I don't even remember the phrases they would use, but they would talk about how, how we can answer a question with like, oh, they do
Mm-hmm.
or they don't. Instead of giving the specific verb, we can just sort of give this completely different verb in
Right.
place. They were talking about that. And
Huh.
they referred to it as some specific form. But so many times they would refer to specific grammatical things, and I would just be like, what is that? And then the teacher would explain it to me, and I would be like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing
yeah.
somehow.
Yeah, language man.
Yeah.
It's a wild thing.
Yeah. I really enjoyed telling them about American high schools.
Yeah.
That was one time that the teacher asked me and said, oh, we're doing a unit on schools. Can you tell us about American high schools? And I was like, oh, can I? Just watching their faces when you show them like a picture of a big American high school, like, suburbs of Chicago type high school.
Yeah.
And all the sports fields too, because they don't do sports in schools. They do them
like
as
as a city.
extracurricular.
Yeah.
Yeah, just outside of the school completely. So just watching them, their faces, I'm like, this is where my brother went to high school. And then equally, they had a weird reaction to mine too, because my high school was super small. And they were like, your whole school is in that one building? Because it was essentially like one hallway.
Yeah.
And they were like, the whole thing? Because their school was pretty sizable. It was not the size of one of those massive Chicago suburb schools, but it was not insignificant,
Right.
I would say. There were a couple hallways to it. It was like a big old square.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. Okay. totally separate
Yeah,
train of
no,
thought
for sure.
now. But do you have anything you disliked about your program?
The timing sometimes was not the greatest, I will say. Just literally the fact that I had to be there for Thanksgiving. I was like, this sucks.
Right.
It was admittedly surprisingly hard to do my schoolwork after Thanksgiving because for I suppose it's been 3 years now, but then for 2 years straight, I had been done before Thanksgiving.
Right.
And I didn't have to work until January. And first of all, just the fact that my brain was sort of like, it's time to go home now as soon as Thanksgiving happened.
Yeah.
And then sort of there was a lot of homesickness around Thanksgiving for me because I was like, I'm supposed to be home right now with my family, hanging out, getting ready for Christmas. None of this is happening. What gives?
Right.
That was rough. And then having to continue to do all my schoolwork and have the motivation to get through to the end of the program in like mid-December. Yeah. I definitely enjoyed the Christmas markets, don't get me wrong, but the timing was sometimes a little rough in terms of the semester just being longer than our fall trimester.
Right. I actually felt the exact opposite way in my program because we went from January to May.
Right, yours was shorter.
So it was shorter because we get like a week off for spring break, but we also got a week off for spring break in this program, and so it felt very normal. And then I just had a really long summer. So
yeah, would love a really long summer. I had a really short winter break instead.
And, like 2 weeks.
Yeah, it turned out okay because I felt that my classes abroad were not as intense as some of my classes here. They were still, they were still making me do the work, but it was not completely a European style approach to schooling where they just sort of lecture at you and then you do your coursework and that's it. There were still, some padding of grades, but some of my classes were genuinely like, we're just going to like lecture, you're going to take a midterm and a final and write a term paper and you're done. That's your grade. So it was a little easier to just keep up day to day.
Right, gotcha.
And therefore I didn't feel the impact of only having 2 weeks to get back to school.
Okay.
It was still shorter than I would have wanted.
Right.
I've been spoiled with Lawrence's full month off. But...
Yes. Man, I love that month.
Oh, it's great.
A good month.
It's great. I'm looking forward to it. It's coming up. Coming up.
Anyway, do you have a favorite memory from study abroad?
Oh gosh.
I know. I've got all these really heavy hitters.
I know. I should have thought about these in advance.
We could let that one stew and I can move on to a different one.
We can stew.
Do you want to stew?
I'll stew for a bit. I also picked Vienna because I didn't want to take enrolled courses at a university.
Gotcha.
Because the European approach to university is a lot more laid back. There's less padding of your grade, less like participation points and daily journals that you just have to, that are graded pass fail, and it's easy points.
It's not busy work.
And I didn't want that full integrated approach to university because I was just not about to throw myself into a completely new system of learning in a completely different country. So because IES Vienna does pretty much all their classes, I think all the classes in the fall. They might still offer some concurrent enrollment in the spring with the local university, but in the fall it's all
nice
at the center.
Yeah. Do you have one thing that you wish you would have known before you started studying abroad?
Okay, so specific. Okay. Set up a PayPal before you go abroad.
Yes. Holy cow.
Because I did not have a PayPal, and normally you're always supposed to tell your bank and your credit card company and whoever else, hi, I'm going to be in this country from this date to this date. And they, hopefully don't lock your card. And my bank and my credit card company did not lock my card. But there was one day when, for some reason, I was making so many purchases online. I think I was buying like train tickets and also a train pass at the same time. It was like very beginning of my time abroad. And it stopped accepting it. I don't know if it was my bank that freaked out or the website that freaked out, but it was like, we can't take this card. Because also, I have a card that's not really accepted everywhere in Europe. It's not one of the major companies. Gotcha. which was fine because my debit card was accepted pretty much everywhere. It was one of the major companies, but like the credit card wasn't accepted. My debit card was like, we can't accept this anymore. And I was completely out of options to pay. So I had to go, I was like, oh, I can PayPal. I changed my number to an Austrian number because that was a lot cheaper than keeping my American one.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't set up a PayPal with a billing address in the US and a phone number that's not from the US. It has to be the same country. So I had to text my brother and use his phone number to set up my PayPal account. And then when I got back to the US, I changed it to my phone number, so I'm not using his phone number anymore. But
dang.
Yeah, it was a process, and it would have been a lot easier if I just set up a PayPal in the US.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Going on that, I can't stress enough how important it is to talk to your financial institutions before you go abroad, because I have a really small local bank as well, and they just put my card out for like Germany. And so every single time I bought something that wasn't from Germany, like online, they would flag it. Or every time I left the country, I had to like email them.
And you left the country a lot.
A lot. Like that was half of my program, was just leaving the country.
That's terrible.
And I had to constantly email them and be like, I'm going to this place. Please make sure my card works. And then I'd get there and it wouldn't work. And the time changed. So the bank's not open. So you have to talk to your banks. You also really should have a credit card as well to like have a second option.
You need multiple forms of payment. It's just a good backup to have. Like, always make sure you have cash. In Europe especially, cash is still very common. There are places that won't take cards, and just in general, things can be cheaper, so it feels silly to pay for like your €3 sandwich with a credit card,
especially if your bank has like international transaction fees, because your €3 sandwich will now be a €7 sandwich because you have €4 tacked on to each purchase. So
luckily my bank didn't freak out as much as yours. It's still, I would say it's still fairly local. Definitely not countrywide. It might be statewide, but luckily they didn't freak out as much. And they caught it when someone stole my information in Prague.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't know what happened because I still had the card on me. I had just returned that evening, earlier in the afternoon. And that evening, my bank popped up with a little like notification on my app, and they were like, possible fraud. Someone is trying to charge your card in Prague right now. And I was like, I'm not in Prague. And then I looked up, they were able to tell me someone was trying to charge the tram company, like the public transit, in a district of Prague I had not visited. So it was not me, but they somehow stole like all the numbers out of my card without taking the card itself.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
That was a really fun thing to happen to me like 2 weeks before I had to go home.
Yeah. I mean,
It turned out okay.
I guess 2 weeks before you leave is better than like halfway through and needing to like change your card information or something.
Yeah, and have them like mail the card to you. Yeah. It worked out okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think my other thing that I think people should know is just to be prepared for not all the food that you're used to be available.
Yeah.
Like, I don't eat beef. That's a big thing for me. And my family usually substitutes beef with turkey, like ground turkey, usually, like making a little hamburger burger thing. That's not really available in Europe because turkeys just aren't as common of an animal. Like, I think they're native to the US or just North America in general, and they're not in Europe. So it's pretty much the only meats I saw in the cheap grocery stores I was shopping in, admittedly. Like, I'm sure if I went somewhere a little more high-end, I could have found some turkey, but I was not about to do that.
Right.
It's like chicken, beef, and pork.
Right.
And that's it. I mean, fish as well, but in terms of like...
I mean, even for me, I actually had a hard time finding like real meat products. Now, granted, I was in a very college, very environmentally friendly city, but like I could always find like meat substitutes, but almost never was it like easy to find actual meat products. Very, very strange. Very completely different than the US.
That is so specific to
Yes.
Freiburg, I think.
So
I didn't have trouble finding meat, but interesting.
Especially in Germany. Like, they're known for,
that's kind of like, they eat potatoes and meat. That is
that's
their
what
diet.
they do.
And sauerkraut.
And
not to terribly stereotype a place that, I spent a lot of time in, but
lots of sauerkraut. Also, like, lots of sausages, and I saw almost like none at the grocery stores.
Sausages are so good, though.
They are.
Like the Würstel stands all around Vienna. 10 out of 10. If you're going to Vienna, you got to try one. And they do have vegetarian Würstel stands if you are a vegetarian and cannot eat the meat.
Nice. We love that. Okay. Do you have any crazy study abroad stories? Ooh. It's okay. I've had a lot of people who don't.
The one time my card got stolen.
Yes, like that, which you already told me. So.
I did already tell you about that. The only other crazy thing, Prague was just a crazy trip for me in general.
Prague is an insane place.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was all sorts of transport problems because it had just snowed that weekend. So it was gorgeous, but then they were like, I don't actually think this was caused by the weather, but they canceled our train car. Not the train, our car. They were like, your car is not running. And this is what we get for booking on a budget train company. But they were like, we've just gotten rid of your car. It just will not be attached to the train. Therefore, you must rebook your ticket yourself. Have fun.
Oh
and I was like, okay. So that was not so crazy. That was kind of miserable, actually, because they told us at like 11 p.m. before we were supposed to leave the next day.
Yeah.
So we lost like half the day in Prague to running around trying to figure that out. And that really sucked, actually. But that was kind of a crazy event. The other what's the word? A less anxiety-inducing crazy story we had, and perhaps it's less crazy too. We were getting pizza from this place in Vienna that a German professor had recommended to us, like one of the German language professors. And it was going to maybe rain. Okay. So you have to make reservations for a lot of restaurants in Vienna. I don't know if it's just like a size thing or a culture thing. I really don't know. But it was still warm enough that people were eating outside. So the outside area was reservation booked up. And we were eating inside, or we were going to eat inside, but they told us, if it starts raining, all these people are going to get their spot and you'll just have to like leave. So it started raining. So we had to take our pizza to go. And the rain would not let up. And we were far from anyone's apartment. I was there with 2 other people. And we were nowhere near anyone's apartment. So we decided we're going to go to this guy's apartment because he has a single and the other 2 of us were in shared apartments. But that was even further. It was the furthest apartment possible we could have picked. So we had to go through this fun little thing of minimizing the walking time. So we had to run to the bus stop down like 2 or 3 blocks down the street in the pouring rain. Then we got on the bus and we took that to the tram stop where we took a silly little like 0.5 lens picture of us. I can show you later. It's pretty funny. Soaking wet, carrying our pizza boxes at the tram stop. We then took the tram stop to the U-Bahn stop where we got on the U-Bahn and took it to his apartment. And luckily the U-Bahn stop was like literally right outside his front door.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to walk in the rain anymore, but it was just this whole like little game of the least walking, the route with the least amount of walking possible, which was just objectively not the fastest route. I don't think it was anywhere close to the fastest route, but it just would not stop raining. The whole time we were on that adventure, it just wouldn't stop raining.
I had something like that happen to me when we were in Paris. And so we had just gotten done with like a class trip down the Seine. And it started like downpouring so hard, and I had yet to buy an umbrella. Pro tip: if you go to Paris in any time between January and March, just bring an umbrella.
I think just bring an umbrella in general, because it doesn't.
It's just so.
I don't think it snows as
there.
often in Central Europe, like climate wise.
Yeah. So I didn't buy an umbrella for the first day because I was like, I can deal with rain. I'm a big girl.
You had a raincoat?
I did not.
Yeah. You're just gonna get soaked the whole time. It'll be fine.
And so because it was raining and we had 2 people whose phones were on like 10%.
Oh no.
And so mine was on 30, and so I was designated the directions person, right? And so we also don't have day-long passes yet for like the public transit and the metro. And so At this point, I'm like, okay, I navigated Berlin's metro system. I can deal with Freiburg's. Paris, I'm coming for you, bro.
Paris is pretty complicated.
Yeah. And so I proceed to get all of my friends to get tickets for this metro that my Google Maps says we should take.
Mm-hmm.
And we get there, and a bunch of them are getting canceled because of the rain, because the rain is running down into the metro tracks. Like, it is raining so hard that, like, there are, like, you can see the water flowing over the side of the metro, like, from downstairs off the metro track. And they're like, this isn't great. But I'm like, okay. Anyway, and so we get on a train, realize we're going the wrong way, because Lillian's navigating skills are so good. And we decide, okay, well, we've gone so far the other way now. Like, what do we do? So we decide to get off. We wait in line to go back. Train gets delayed, and now it's like 40 minutes, like, till the next one comes. And we're like, well, I guess we're walking. And so we walk to the next bus stop. Paris bus system is even worse than the metro. I was just like, the whole rest of the trip, I was never allowed to navigate again because of how bad I messed up that first night.
That's a tough break.
Yeah. But by the end, I was feeling pretty okay about it. Like, I went back another time and I survived the metro system that time. But I learned the hard way in a downpour.
Yeah.
About learning before you get there, the transit system.
Yeah, it is difficult to know these transit systems. And it definitely helps, after amount of time, you become familiar with the words. Like, I finally figured out that the little voices on the train that came on before every stop were telling you that the exit was to the left or the right.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept hearing what I thought was gibberish. But finally I learned to recognize that, and I was like, oh, look at me. And then, I could read the signs a little easier by the end as well. But yeah, no, I was useless in Prague. Luckily, Prague was like, 3 lines, but
right, Prague is an okay one. Stockholm was also pretty small, but Paris is just so large, and there's so many people. Like, all the places, and so you can't, like, pull off to, like, figure out where you're going, because you're gonna bother someone else.
Paris has a lot of pickpocket problems too.
Yeah,
so you have to feel like, I have to protect my phone. I loved that about Vienna. They did not have those problems. I saw people walking around, like people from IES, walking around with their phone in their back pocket, which is a huge no. Don't do that. That's stupid. You're gonna get your phone pickpocketed, apparently, unless you're in Vienna. Because I just watched people walk around with their phone in their back pocket, fully visible, by the way. It's not even, like, all the way in the pocket. It's just sort of like sticking out. Yeah, and it didn't get stolen. Huh. It was crazy. But yeah, Vienna is pretty respectful of it, just not stealing the community as a whole. Yeah, stuff. There's a lot of just kindness. So that's lovely. But Paris, no, don't take your chances. Put that phone, like, under your shirt.
Yeah. No. It's Paris, man. Anyway, that's when I decided I didn't want to live in cities anywhere anymore. Because I grew up in a place where, like, the first time I went on public transit was actually in Europe. And so, like, I was, like, transit newbie, because there's not transit where I live.
You hadn't even been on, like, a bus system? Like a sad bus system in the US?
Not even a sad bus system.
Not even a sad bus system.
Yeah.
I had been on sad bus systems. I'd been on subways a couple of times when I visited cities. I was most familiar with the bus systems in the US, which, they're not great. But I was a big fan of trams. That was new to me, and those were great. I loved those.
I liked Prague's trams a lot.
Oh, they were lovely.
Anyways. Okay, what was your favorite thing to do in Vienna?
I like taking the U-Bahn.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, like, my absolute favorite thing to do, but I really enjoyed being able to do my daily tasks without getting in a car. I liked just being able to walk to places and listen to an audiobook, or just simply vibe and not have to worry about crashing into someone because I wasn't the driver.
Yeah.
That was lovely.
That is cool.
Otherwise, I was a big fan of the museums too. The museums we visited, I mean, we mostly visited them for class, but I liked that. Oh, sometimes I went to Schönbrunn and walked around their grounds, which is the big palace in Vienna where the Habsburgs used to be.
Okay.
The Habsburgs and all their inbred tendencies. They hung out there. That was their summer home.
Gotcha.
But they have a gorgeous, absolutely massive grounds. And they're lovely in the summer. I'm sure that they would be perfectly fine to walk in the winter as well. But they were particularly pretty at the end of summer when we arrived. I liked walking around there for just a sort of nature-y moment to my week. That was lovely.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So what's your like travel background? Like, have you done a lot of travel before this?
In terms of international or domestic? International. So I had been to France for 3 weeks with my French class in high school before I went abroad. That's all I had done. Yeah, it was 3 weeks with the French trip. I mean, okay, technically I went to Mexico as a toddler.
Yeah,
we're not counting that. Yeah, no, it doesn't count. And it was a very different experience, obviously. It was less independent because we were minors. So first of all, our teachers were responsible for our safety. I had a great story with that where we didn't do that well. We screwed it up. Anyway, but yeah, we were minors, so they were responsible for our safety.
Right.
So it was a lot more guided.
Yeah.
A lot more, less independence.
Yeah. Right. And so with that in mind, what kind of things did you experience studying abroad that you wouldn't from normal travel?
I became much more familiar with the everyday life in Vienna. Obviously, I became very accustomed to the transit system. Like, by the end, I sort of had a sense. I knew, obviously, where my main line went, like the U-Bahn line I took every day. I knew where that went. And I knew where the stops were, and I could generally pinpoint them on a map and be like, oh, if I want to get to this area of the city, I know I have to go, like, this far on my U-Bahn line. And I was somewhat familiar with some of the other lines that I took. And I was familiar with the grocery stores, too. Gotcha. Like, that's not somewhere I would ever go as a tourist. Like, when I went to any of the other cities, I mean, maybe if I was staying for a week in a city, I would go to the grocery store and, like, make food at a hostel or something. But generally, no. And I became very familiar with the German grocery scene, which is an experience that all should have in their lives.
If you want to cry from going grocery shopping, go shopping at a German grocery store.
I felt like the Austrian ones were very nice. Very nice. Not like overly bubbly like American cashiers might be, but there was no like
mean.
They weren't mean. They weren't impatient with us either. And I think that might just be because the grocery store I frequented was really close to all of the IES shared apartments. So they were dealing with Americans like regularly year round. So I think they were just sort of used to us because when we went the very first time, we put our stuff on the little counter. They flew through it because it was an Aldi. I mean, they called it Hofer, but it's Aldi. I love Aldi. It was cheap.
It is so cheap. But Aldi is where I've gotten yelled at by cashiers most.
Oh, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
Because you have to bring your own bags and all that. Well, that's just a Europe thing in general.
You have to bring your own bags all the places. But Aldi, they were particularly impatient.
Which is interesting. I didn't feel like they were impatient with us.
Yeah.
But I also have an attitude of like, I just don't want to talk to those people very much. Like in the US, I guess I kind of will. But I didn't really want to talk to them as much. So they just, put it all through. And then they said some words at me, which were my total. And I could mostly figure that out and be like, I recognize some of these numbers, but my numbers in German were not so great by the end still. That's hard. It takes a while to build up that skill, I feel.
Yeah.
And then I would say, mit Karte bitte.
Mit Karte bitte.
And then they would put the thing through and I would tap it through. And I think I probably said Danke afterwards. And then I just like scooped up all my groceries in a panic and left.
Yeah.
But they never seemed impatient with me. And maybe it was just because like after a while, I understood what they were doing enough to like, if they had started interviewing me on the spot, I wouldn't be able to respond. But like I wasn't going to muck up their flow.
Yeah, gotcha.
But the first time we went, luckily it was pretty empty. But they said the total to us. And we all just stood there like, and then finally one of my roommates said, what? And then he was like, oh, Americans, and switched to English.
Yeah. I made it my goal to try and make it so that they wouldn't automatically talk to me in English. Like, that was my least.
Oh, they never automatically talk to me in English. I don't know if it was just a Vienna specific thing. Like, do you think they could pinpoint that you were American?
I think, like, one time, for example, I felt that way because I was literally talking on the phone to, like, my father.
Oh, yeah,
so I was speaking. but like in cafes, especially when I order food, they'll always respond to me in the totals with English, because even if I order in German, it's so bad that they're like,
your accent pops out. Yeah.
Yeah, and also this, like, I've been told I have this look that comes across my face whenever I try and speak German that makes it look like I'm about to cry. And so I think they just take pity on me.
Oh.
But
they pity. Yeah. They never, I think it was a thing in Vienna where there's so many people who live there from different countries that they sort of, they're not going to default
to anything besides German.
I think so, because, you know, it's not the assumption that, oh, if you don't speak the mother tongue of the country, you automatically speak English. Like, if you go to Paris and you can't speak French, well, they're going to be like, American tourist.
Right.
Or,
in Berlin, most people will speak to you in English in my experience.
Like, interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
But Vienna, and I don't know if it was also, we were living in an area that was mostly actually like people living in Vienna permanently. So I think that was also part of it. But I think the general assumption is that, you know, it's not, if you don't speak German, it's not that you automatically speak English. Like, there's plenty of immigrants from other places around Europe, so they just start with German
and then figure it out from there.
Yeah, but most of them do speak English, to be entirely fair.
Yeah.
Like, if you say, oh, do you speak English? Fucking see English? They'll be like, yes. But less annoyed than the French, I feel.
Yeah.
Not to dig at the French here, but the Germans are a little more.
Dig it.
The Germanic speakers are a little more.
They're so nice. I don't know. They look, in my experience, Germans look mean, but they're actually very nice people.
Yeah, apparently the Viennese have a reputation for being cranky.
Yeah.
I learned this when I arrived, and they were like, do you think we're cranky? And I was like, no. Well, not unless I'm at a restaurant, but I don't know if that's because I'm just used to really excitable, bubbly American waiters, or if it's just a
I have a
them
thing that I think it's just the way the language sounds, is that it sounds very harsh.
Yeah.
And so you just assume that people are mad in the way that they're speaking, but it's not, you know, like, somebody can be saying the nicest things to you in German, and if you don't understand German, it's still gonna sound like a mad German person. Like, yeah. You know, so especially if you don't speak German, I feel like everything just sounds really harsh.
I had a weird experience, like, by the time near the end of my experience in Vienna, I felt like sometimes I couldn't tell if people were speaking German or English, like if I was just passing them, because they sounded so vaguely familiar and yet not. I don't know, it was a very weird experience. My German professor thought I was really strange for that one. She was like, huh, and I was like, no, I agree, it's a big huh. I don't really understand why I'm sort of like, ooh. It was only when I was like eavesdropping.
So, can you tell me about your favorite memory from study abroad?
Okay, it's very touristy, admittedly, but, and it's not a major reason that I picked Vienna, but I was enticed by the ability to go to Salzburg and see the Sound of Music filming locations.
Okay.
So I went to Salzburg, like, I think it was my first independent trip while I was studying abroad. And I went to Salzburg with a friend. We also visited Hallstatt, which is a very also touristy place. So we found a bike tour of the Sound of Music filming locations, which was great because there's plenty of bus tours, but those were like aggressively touristy, like just, you know, it's very American. And to be fair, the bike tour was also absolutely aimed at Americans. Every single person on that tour was an American. I was also the youngest by far. Like, my friend and I were there, and everyone else was like middle-aged people or older, like middle-aged or close to retired. And I was like, well, I'm also here.
Yeah.
But it was lovely because the bike tour felt a little less cheesy. And it was also a nice little bit of exercise, which you don't always get doing touristy things. And you could go to places that the bus couldn't.
Huh.
So we went up to the Abbey, where there's several scenes going in and out of the Abbey. So they had this gate, which, fun fact, I actually, like, the filming crew took out part of the bars and then put them back in because there's a shot where they go through the gate. And the Abbey didn't know that. The nuns at the Abbey found this out when one of the tours was coming by and talking about this, and they were like, sorry, you did what? So that, anyway, we got to see that, and we saw where they had welded the bars back together.
Oh my gosh.
And we got to go in, and that was really neat because the bus couldn't have gotten up there. It was a really steep hill, like one of those narrow European streets that's like cobblestoney, and you couldn't have fit like a tour bus up there.
Right.
But the bikes, we could get up there. We didn't bike up. We walked those bikes up. It was really, really steep.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those places the bus couldn't necessarily go. And it was a lovely experience. I had a lovely little tour guide. And me and all the middle-aged people really enjoyed ourselves. And my friend, he was there too.
Yeah.
We had a great time. But that was just, it was really lovely to me because it was one of the better tours I took.
Okay.
It felt more like person to person instead of just person making money.
Right.
And I just loved the biking part of it. It felt very, it was lovely.
That's awesome.
Even though it was very touristy of me, but sometimes you have to indulge that part of yourself.
Yeah. I mean, there's normally a reason tourist things are tourist things. Yeah. You know, even if if they get a little old by doing it so many times, like there was a reason that people go to see that thing, you know?
And I think it's like sometimes a lot of people talk about how they want to do non-touristy things and go to places that aren't frequented by tourists, but those places don't necessarily always have the infrastructure to deal with that. They're not prepared for you. The tourist locations are like, they're like, we get this all the time. We have all the guides in various languages because we know we're a spot for people to come to, and they're much more prepared for you as like a foreigner. It's a little easier for you, but it's also like you're not burdening them.
Right. And I also think like as long as you do a little bit of both, it's okay. You know, like you shouldn't not go see the tourist things, but it only, like, if you just choose to not do anything else but tourist things, that's where I think it gets to be a little bit like you're closing yourself off to other options.
Yeah. Maybe go eat in a local restaurant, but hit up like the famous cathedral too.
Right.
You can do both.
You don't have to choose. Anyway. Okay, so last question.
Okay.
Can you tell me why you think somebody should study abroad?
I think you can learn so much about yourself studying abroad, honestly. I had never before studied abroad lived like completely independently from my parents, or just from anyone in general, because obviously here, like, we get a dining hall.
Right.
You get a custodian in your shared bathroom. So you don't have to do as much. And my parents, you know, it's not like I didn't have to do chores, but it's a different experience to have to completely fend for yourself. I think it's also really important to broaden your perspective of the world. There is so much you can learn just by experiencing other places, and so many preconceptions that you can break, and just implanted ideas that can be challenged, and that's important to your growth as a person. I think college does that a lot, but I think study abroad was a really huge part of that as well for me, because there's only so much I can change by going to college, or there's only so many ideas that can be challenged by going to college in the state where I live.
Right.
Admittedly, not the state where I grew up, but it's still within the country I live and grew up in. And so much of that was challenged going abroad. Right. And it was also a good self-challenge too. I mean, I did fine there speaking no German, but that was a challenge.
Absolutely.
And challenges are really important to our self-growth, and
for sure,
I think sometimes our self-value too.
Right.
Like, I have a much more confident view of myself, I think.
Absolutely. That all the way. Yeah. Like, my self-confidence right now is through the roof. Like, in this being back at college immediately after studying abroad thing, like, I'm like, I could literally do anything at this point.
It's your first term back, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's been a crazy one. But, like, seriously, so many things that I once saw as these, like, really daunting tasks are so minor now.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I moved 3,000 miles away. So I can
With
do this.
A currency. I couldn't recognize
in no language.
I couldn't recognize the colors of the currency for the longest time. I still probably couldn't, because all of our currency is the same color, same shape. Theirs is all different colors, different shapes. And they can do mental math that I can't do because their tax is not. I don't do it because our tax isn't included in the price displayed, but theirs is. So people will be like Europe. Sitting there making out their exact change, and they're ready to go when they check out, and I'm like, oh, like trying to find like just a €5 bill so I can be like, just give me change. I don't want to make the change.
Right.
Random roommates, not scary when I came back. Scary. I lived with 4 random roommates.
Not scary.
Abroad. Yeah.
When you move abroad and you know no one, knowing people who at least speak your language, you've already got more in common than the people I lived with in Germany.
Like, oh, you lived with? Were you in just like a setting with like not a homestay? Were you in a homestay? Okay.
It was the German university housing.
Oh.
So one of my roommates didn't speak. I mean, he spoke enough English to be in school, but it was not fluently.
Oh boy.
So, I was lucky that 2 of my other roommates spoke it really well. And so at least I could talk to people. But,
gosh, I can't imagine how isolating it would be to live with people you just straight up cannot communicate with.
Yeah. It was
luckily, I don't think any study abroad puts you in that position.
No.
If you're doing a homestay, you already have enough language basis to do that.
Right. So, anyway, you can learn so much about yourself by studying abroad.
You can learn so much about yourself and really shape your image, your self-image.
For sure.
There's a lot that you can learn in 3 months about yourself.
Yes.
I may not have
so much.
I may not have been academically as challenged as I was at Lawrence, but boy, was I personally challenged. Oh my gosh.
As a person, I learned more about myself in like those 4.5 months than I've learned in the last like 5 years of my life.
I, for the longest time, thought I was not a city person. And maybe it depends on the kind of city I'm in, but I was like, I actually really loved Vienna. And there were things that, I probably enjoy more about the US than I did Vienna, but overall I was like, whoa, I just learned that I could totally live in a city as a fully grown adult one day.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so last thing.
Oh,
do you have anything on campus that you'd like to shout out? Yeah.
Like an event?
Like whatever you do, whatever you want to be like, this is a really cool thing that people should check out.
Join choir.
Join choir. I like it.
Yeah. Cool. And if you're in the con, come over to the college once in a while. I think it's important to mix between the two. And not totally isolate yourself in one area.
Commingle.
Yeah. But like seriously, get like a extracurricular. It can be really nice.
I like it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.